All right. Hello, Onivino viewers. I'm here with Dave Miner and a friend of mine, Andrew Albert. Andrew is a comedian and sommelier, so we should have an exciting talk today. And all of you know Dave. Dave is the founder of Miner Family Vineyards from the Napa Valley. So we're going to have a big talk today about all things Dave, all things Andrew, and all things wine. Andrew, do you want to do a little introduction about yourself and how you got into the wine scene?
Yeah, I got into the wine world because I just wanted to have a side job before the comedy world fully took over my life. I had spent some time working in restaurants and such, and I'd move out to Halifax, and there were some wine stores out there that are independent. There's independent from the government agencies, like more like what Dave would be used to in the States. And I got a job at a wine store, and then just kind of proposed to the guy, like, would you be down to paying for some of the education? And he was totally cool to have a sommelier at the store. So I went through I went through the CAPS program in Halifax. And then when I moved out to Calgary, I worked at a different wine store, and they put me through WSET. So I did two different designations as a somm. But in the last 5 years, the life on the road has really taken over. And I kind of, the wine, I haven't worked in the wine business in the last couple of years, actually.
You miss it?
I do miss it. I really enjoyed even just working at the store because it was nice and chill, and I was cool with having that 3-4 days a week. Plus I was like often running the tasting program and stuff. So new stuff would be coming in, and then I would run the tasting events, and it was nice. But I mean, life on the road, I couldn't do it anymore, being 46, 48 weekends on the road. So that's had to pick my poison. I finally fished my wish.
And Dave, do you enjoy being in the wine industry?
Most days I do enjoy being in the wine industry. It's I've been doing this since 1993.
Yeah.
And in 1989, my uncle bought a vineyard and started making wine. So I just kind of started hanging out at his place and drinking wine and barrel tasting and wandering around in the vineyard when they were pruning. And so, I mean, I've been drinking wine, most of my life and collecting wine, but I didn't really get exposed to the grape growing, winemaking process until probably the late 80s.
Where did
90s.
your uncle have a vineyard, Dave? Was it at Napa?
His vineyard is still here in Oakville. So he bought a place as kind of a weekend getaway from San Francisco. He was in the software business. And he bought it up on the top of the hill, right near where our winery is now, just above Dalla Valle Vineyard on the eastern side of Oakville. So it's actually the easternmost border of the Oakville appellation where his vineyard is. And it's...
and is it still in the family?
Pardon me?
Is it still in the family?
Yeah, unfortunately, my uncle died probably a year after he and I started working together in the wine business.
Yeah.
But his widow still owns it, and it's still just right down the street. So
that was a few years before you founded Miner Family, correct?
Yeah, I initially started working with him running Oakville Ranch, which was his wine label. And then in 96, we bought this winery facility right at the bottom of the hill. And I started making more wines than what we really wanted to put into the Oakville Ranch label, which was, sort of my aunt's. She sort of inherited it from him. And so I started making wines that eventually ended up under the Miner label when we got a label design done. And the facility we bought was way bigger than what we really needed. It's still actually bigger than what we really need production-wise. But we started doing small projects from different vineyard sites so that we would have wine to pour people every day in the tasting room. We had a full tasting room license here, but I didn't have enough wine to be open every day. So we only opened on Friday, Saturday, Sunday for guests to come in. And I started making some fun wines that were interesting to me and relatively inexpensive for people to buy and drink. Things like Viognier and Sangiovese and stuff that was just fun everyday drinking wines. And those wines all kind of took off.
So that was in 96. Is this the 25th anniversary?
Actually, the 15 Oracle that we're about to taste later is our 20th anniversary.
Okay.
This vintage, this year, 2020, is our 25th.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Amazing.
Yep.
Okay.
And hopefully I'm going to get some more grapes from my aunt's vineyard, Oakville Ranch, for our 25th anniversary, because we don't really get grapes from there anymore, but I'm hoping to get some this year. It would be
it would be a nice parallel. Bring it back.
Yeah, it'd be good to go back to our roots and have a 25th anniversary kind of Oakville Ranch designate cab from there. It'd be cool.
I look forward to that.
I'm hoping. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. So when you acquired the property that you're at now, you had some caves built, did you not, under the winery?
We had some what?
Caves built. Do you have like the?
Yeah, the caves, because we had minimal barrel storage here. You know, we were storing barrels in what was originally designed as a tank room, which, because of the way the floors are sloped, it's not ideal. So we didn't really have enough room here for the barrels that we had as we started growing. So we were storing them in different warehouse areas around Napa. And so in 1998, we started drilling caves. So we drilled a 20,000 square foot cave, and it took about 14 months to do. And then we moved in, you know, basically 14 months later, and had all of our barrel storage in one spot right behind the winery.
Yeah.
And it makes it so much easier to not have to run around, but it's also way more efficient and sort of healthier for the wines to store them in a cave as opposed to above ground warehouses where you're having to run humidification and refrigeration 24/7, 365 days a year. In a cave, you don't have to do any of that. And you get much less evaporation. You don't have to move the barrels around as much, so it's much easier on the wine.
And then you have a really cool space to have some parties in.
We do. We have like a big table and sort of a hospitality area in the cave that we can do sit-down tastings or wine dinners. Or
now it's full of wine, Dave, but do you also have like a side room pantry with canned goods, so in case shit goes sideways you can head to the bunker?
Well, no, but that's a great idea.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
If we have to hunker down, as long as you have a thief and you can get wine out of the barrels, we're probably good for a little while anyway.
I just want to close on the caves. I meant to ask you several times and I never got around to it. Is it one of the biggest the biggest spaces like that in the valley?
No, I mean, it's a reasonably good sized cave. We kind of modeled it after a cave that we saw at Cuvée-San, which is no longer Cuvée-San, but 20,000 square feet is on the bigger side, but there are certainly bigger caves.
Okay.
I mean, there's a couple that are 40,000 square feet, like double the size. So.
Okay. And with all that space, you guys, I think you do you do crush for other?
We do. We do crush grapes and make wines for some smaller wineries that don't have their own space. So they bring their grapes in here. They write their own work orders, and the wines are made the way that they want them made.
Yeah.
But my people just do all the labor, and then we store them in the cave until they're ready for bottling. And we have a full bottling line here as well, which is nice. So we bottle all those wines for those folks. And then we do some other custom bottling for certain wineries too that don't have a bottling line. They don't want to use the mobile bottling line. So they bring their stuff here. We put it in a tank. We get it ready for bottling. They bring their own supplies. And we bottle it up, and then they take it off site and store it in their own warehouse space.
Very cool. So speaking of your people, we have Laguerre that has been making wine with you guys since the beginning.
Yes.
Okay. And
he's our director of winemaking and general manager now. And
Gary Brookman, nice man.
He's a good man. He's been here probably 23, 4 years, something like that now.
Yeah. And then you also have Stacy
Vogel, who's been with us about 12 years now, and she came on as the assistant winemaker. And then I think 7 years ago, we promoted her to full winemaker.
Okay.
She's great. And her assistant is a woman named Michelle Chaffrier, who's been here probably four years as the assistant winemaker now. And then we have a series of folks that work in the cellar, do some lab work and enology, barrel folks. Our guy Joe, who's been here actually probably a year or two longer than Gary maybe, runs our bottling line and also does barrel work and cellar work.
Very cool. Do you want to walk us through how it works? I mean, I can tell our clients, I mean, we always have 2 of your cabs in the market. So we have Oracle almost always available. We've become very fond of Emily's cab here, and the Wild Yeast Shard is always a hit with our clients. But we dabble with the Viognier, but you do all sorts of other varietals. So you've got the Marsanne, the Roussanne, the Viognier, as I just said. You do some Grenache, Mourvèdre, the Sangiovese, Tempranillo. What am I missing? There's Cab Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, Chard, Pinot. What else we got?
Syrah. We bottle a small amount of straight Malbec, some straight Cab Franc, mostly just for our tasting room. But yeah, we do probably more varietals than a lot of wineries. But it's because I love wines. I love all kinds of wines, and we've just run into opportunities to pick grapes from people who are great farmers and fun people to deal with. And most of those wines are relatively smaller quantity. The Viognier, which we started doing like right away in 1997, has grown into one of our larger production wines, but it's a few thousand cases. That's a large production wine for us. So we make a lot of varietals, but some things are only 200 to 400 case production.
Yes, you do annually. We're always between 20,000, 25,000 is your.
We're right around 30,000 cases a year, but a number of those wines are sold almost exclusively through the winery, like direct to consumer or through the wine club. Things like the Marsanne Roussanne Viognier blend, which is called the Iliad.
Yes, I've had that too.
The Red Rhone blend, the Odyssey, which is Grenache, Mourvèdre, Cinsault, and a little bit of Syrah. That's, I don't know, maybe 300-400 cases. And the Syrah is only, maybe 400 or 500 cases as well, straight Syrah. And then we do a little bit of straight Grenache as well. So a lot of Rhone stuff.
Yeah.
Because over the years, I've just really migrated towards those varietals, at least for my own personal fun.
Yeah.
And then I spent some time in the Rhone Valley every other year or so. And I spent some time with Rhone producers here in California because they come here a lot too. And we have a big Rhone celebration, which was supposed to be last weekend down in Paso Robles, which we didn't do, unfortunately. But I've really, over time, kind of fallen in love with the varietals from the Rhone Valley and also the Rhone Valley in general. I just love the people. I love the geography. I love the food. It's just a magnificent place.
Curiosity.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
Ali. Just curious, Dave. I was wondering, like, she obviously said all of the grapes that are known to man. She didn't really, but there was a heck of a lot of varietals that she'd mentioned. How much of this is estate fruit, and how much do you need to source? Like, do you have plots of your own Tempranillo and such?
Well, interestingly, Tempranillo we no longer do. So we did that for 5 or 6 years just because it was fun and it was really delicious. But uh, it was just too many varietals and too many things. But
It's a lot, yeah.
to answer your question, we don't have a lot of our own vineyard. So we have a cab vineyard here in Oakville, and I have a Roussan vineyard up at my house in Angwin, which is Howell Mountain, also the eastern hillsides. But then primarily the rest of the things that we do are purchased grapes. So, but in almost all cases, we buy grapes from growers who allow us to control the farming in our blocks. We have consistently the same rows year in and year out. Some of them are long-term contracts, some of them are year-to-year contracts, but we've been doing the same plots for example, Pinot from Monterey, we've been doing the same plots since 1997 or 8.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, cool.
the resources are very consistent, and we also get the same rows every year. We get to control, how much water they get, how much crop is on, how much leafing they do. With certain growers, I don't really have to worry about it because I know that they're doing the right thing year in and year out. So it's easier for us, but in some cases we need to kind of be on it all the time, where we're looking at visiting vineyards regularly, looking at, how things are developing, the crop load, what the watering schedule looks like. And you have to be able to control how those things are farmed in order to control the quality of what you get in your bottle.
At the end of the day, it has your name on it. So I get that.
Farming, I think there's a lot of emphasis in the industry on winemakers and, the celebrity crap that goes along with that. But it really is more to me about farming than it is about what you do once you get it in. I think what you should do once you get it in is babysit it, give it the right environment to do what it needs to do, and get out of the way. So it's easy still to control the quality of what we do, even though we don't own the land. And frankly, if I had to buy all the vineyards that we buy grapes from, it would cost, hundreds of millions of dollars to own that land.
Yeah, and I want to express that to our consumer, because there is a misconception with the fact that owning your fruit means that it's better. And that's really quite false for some of the reasons that you just said.
Yeah, and even just in terms of vocabulary, the word reserve or the word estate in the United States has no technical meaning. There's no legal, you could put reserve or estate on almost anything. If you control how the method of farming occurs on a given plot of land, even though you don't own the land, you can technically call that estate grown wine.
Yeah.
Now, there's legally within the labeling restrictions in the United States, that's the case. And, in Europe, reserve in Italy, for example, has a very specific meaning.
Exactly.
In the United States, it has no meaning.
Yeah. And people don't know that. And there's a really, there's like a huge misconception when it comes to marketing of wine, and people really feel comforted by very false bits of information.
And I mean, labeling laws are very specific, but also in some cases they're very non-specific. So, you can vineyard designate something that's only, I think the rule is 85%.
Yeah.
So the other 15% can be from some other vineyard. Yeah. And if you call something Cabernet, the minimum or the limit is 75%. So the other 25% can be almost anything you want. Well, and most people don't put on the label what else is in there. So,
and that actually can bring us to how you segregate or segment is probably a better word, your product. So like, I know that when we go to your site, when you're commercializing, it's like Rhone blends, Bordeaux blends, Burgundy blends. So did you intentionally did that for those reasons, or?
Well, I mean, I think it just, for me, seemed to make a logical breakdown. People understand, I think, what, a Bordeaux style wine is and what grapes go into that. And, Rhone wines are different types of grapes. So, we separated it that way, I think, just to make a clear distinction of what it is we're doing. There's a lot of people that will mix grape varieties that don't necessarily come from a particular region. I mean, even in Italy now, they're growing, French varietals like Merlot, Chardonnay, things like that. And we tend to be pretty traditional about what we do. We don't tend to mix Bordeaux varietals. We don't put Syrah in our Cabernet. I don't put Syrah in my Pinot Noir. We make Syrah, and the Syrah is, I think, a beautiful example of the grape and what it can do in California. And Pinot is Pinot. And, for me, it makes no sense to put Syrah in Pinot. I already make Syrah. I don't want my Pinot to taste like Syrah. I want it to taste like Pinot. So
I don't want your Pinot to taste like Syrah either. Please.
I mean, I think kind of traditional, and my background is I have a real appreciation for the older world style wines. And I think we try to follow those guidelines, or traditions maybe is a better word for it. Because in the US, we're not told what we can plant in particular areas like they are in France. We're not told when to harvest or whether or not we can water. So
I think your land allows that, because if we're looking at like the traditional breakdown of how vineyards are separated, Bordeaux is Bordeaux and the Rhone is the Rhone, whereas like you happen to be in an area that can produce all of those varietals at the same time, and they all make sense. Like the Rhone varietals make a lot of sense for you guys, and they always turn out really amazing, as do
There are certain logical things about where you plant different varietals that make a lot of sense. And in Europe, they've been doing it for thousands of years. Here, we've only been doing it for, a couple hundred years. So we're, in a lot of cases, we're still learning, what soil type and what microclimates and what, do well for what varietals. And I think there are certain things like, I don't really want cool climate Cabernet necessarily. I mean, we want a long growing season, but you need some heat to get that grape right. And you don't necessarily want to plant things like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in a really hot, dry spot. It doesn't produce the ideal results. So those things are important, but California is cool because we have so many different microclimates. I mean, when you're closer to the coast, you have a cooler, more foggy environment. The soil types are very different. As you move north in Napa, you get a much rockier volcanic soil that's fairly dry, that's great for Bordeaux varietals. It also works well for some Rhone varietals as well. So
and what's cool for you, like your Viognier is a really fun example. The Viognier is unoaked, right, with you?
Oaked, yes.
And then if you were in the Rhone, it would be oaked, correct?
Oaked, yeah.
And they taste similar.
When I started hanging out with those guys, Yves Gangloff, François Villard, Yves Couleron, and we started talking about how we make Viognier versus how they make Viognier, and they're like, well, no oak, no ML, that's not Viognier. But then when they tasted it, they said, well, this tastes more like Condrieu than most Condrieu.
Yeah.
It's very, I think, a very classic style of Viognier that reminds me of what I first fell in love with in Condrieu.
Yeah, and you have a really good palate. I mean, I've been lucky enough to travel around with you and taste many wines with you at different shows. And you know, I know that you know what's up, and that I know that you also aren't looking to call, you know, an apple an orange or anything. That you're quite serious about like that, which I think is really cool, and that's kind of why your wines probably turn out the way they do. You know. Top quality. Good job, Dave. Good job.
Thank you. No, I have an affinity for being true to the varietal and not trying to make it into something that it's not, just to make it commercially viable or whatever the reason might be. You know, I want it to have a reference point historically and sort of varietally, so that when you smell it and you taste it, you go, that's it. That's beauty. It's, you know, I mean, it's balanced, it's lovely. It's, you know, it makes me happy. And, you know, I mean, not everybody likes Viognier, so we make Chardonnay, we make Sauvignon Blanc.
Peasants. They're peasants.
That don't like Viognier?
I don't like Viognier. Who doesn't like Viognier?
I know.
It's so fantastically greasy.
10 years ago in the United States, no one knew what Viognier was. And if they can't pronounce it, and
it's Viognier,
they look stupid pronouncing it, then they're not going to order it, because nobody wants to look stupid, you know? It's like, and I get that, but it's for the Rhone varietals, Viognier, I think, has become one of the more popular varietals now in the US, but it took people a while to figure out how to say it and feel comfortable ordering it. So
Dave's Viognier movement. Is that the varietal that you grow on your front porch? Isn't that the front yard Viognier?
Riesson in the front yard.
Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that's all very interesting. I think. Am I forgetting anything when it comes to your amazing property and your amazing winery? Oh, I wanted to talk about the solar panels.
Yeah.
Right?
We installed probably maybe 9 years ago solar panels up on the hillside behind the winery.
Yeah.
And so since then we're 100% solar powered.
Yeah.
So we try to obviously be as green as humanly possible and have a very small carbon footprint here.
Yeah.
So we obviously recycle glass and corks and, you know, everything, cardboard, and everything gets recycled. Even our wastewater gets recycled. We run it through a series of ponds and aerate it and treat it, and then we use it for watering irrigation for our whole property, and then the solar panels too. So, you know, I think we're a pretty clean organization, and we like to keep it that way. We're not using pesticides. We're not using herbicides. We're trying to we use, you know, a certain amount of sulfur in the vineyard, but it's parts per million, and no one wants to match sticky smell in their wines. We don't want to overuse it, but.
No. And I mean, sulfur gets a bad rap too. It's another one of those, like, there's a really interesting marketing technique with some of the organic and natural wines, where it's like they really create confusion by sending these messages, and I don't think that's necessarily right, but we don't really have to talk about that. But I do like to clarify that we do sometimes need a bit of sulfur, and there is a point where it's okay. You know?
Stabilize your wine in some way.
And it's used a few places in the winemaking. I mean, while it's on the vine and cleaning and stopping the fermentation and all kinds of things, right?
Well, you definitely want to limit that though as well.
There are sulfides also that are a natural byproduct of fermentation. So the only way you can make a completely sulfide-free wine is to use a spinning cone and spin the sulfides out of the wine. And when you do that, it also spins alcohol out, and it spins flavor and texture and character out. And, you know, wine is a living thing. There's bacteria in it as well that are alive. But that's what makes wine what it is. It's like cheese,
Yeah.
Cheese is what it is because it's moldy, it's funky. And that's what makes it great, I mean.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, it's I think as long as there's some respect and consideration for what is too much. And I mean, there's a lot more sulfur and sulfites in most of the food that we eat on a daily basis than there is in wine. And it's really, I find, I'm a big fan of like sustainability and making the best product, but I'm also a big fan of people who, invest hundreds of $1,000s in making wine, having the ability to make a decision to save their business without being cast aside as like, murderers of the planet because it's false.
For us, it's about common sense.
Yeah.
And nobody really wants to pay a lot of money for a bottle of wine that's unstable either. So, or, doesn't taste good. So,
no.
How
You're
often?
in a luxury segment, right? So, I mean, you have to protect your product. There's just no choice. Sorry, Andy, were you going to say something?
Oh, it's just because how often do you open up a natural bottle of wine and then you're like, wow, that smells like Sunday morning farts right there. You know what I mean? It's horrible.
Well,
it happens,
It's like, that's the other thing too. Like, I don't want to sway on the other side. And I do really appreciate a lot of the natural wines,
Mm-hmm.
but it's as unstable as the regular winemaking practice. So like, it's like Dave said, it's common sense and intelligence. So you do have these natural wines that are showing really poor examples of what a good natural wine is. And then you have, the traditional winemakers making a product that isn't a good representation of that either. So I think it's just the common sense of it all. I am a fan of natural wine. I'm just not a fan of the way people are ping-ponging off like a traditional wine versus a natural wine. Like I think that has to stop.
Or that people just look at it as black and white because there is no black and white.
Exactly.
Yeah, to me, there's not. I mean, everything about what we do with our wines is pretty natural. I mean, fermentation is pretty natural, but sulfides are a byproduct of fermentation, and it's a very natural process. And in a lot of cases, we're like wild yeast Chardonnay, we're using native yeast, but you still get sulfides when that fermentation occurs. So, it's common sense. And things like biodynamic farming, there are some amazing things about biodynamic farming to me that make a tremendous amount of sense. But then there's also a little bit of it that smacks of, funky religion and crystal worship and
Witchcraft.
And I think also like allowing the moon to dictate when you harvest is kind of like maybe that would work on one vintage, but what if it doesn't on another? Like, are you supposed to just have the whole thing fall to shit?
And I think that's a very great statement. I mean, in a wet year, the limit on sulfuring in your vineyard to be certified organic in the U.S. Would basically mean you're going to lose your crop. So does that make sense? I don't know. It's an expensive commitment to give up an entire harvest because mold and mildew takes over. So,
and then the last product isn't necessarily as bad as some people make it out to be as well. So like sometimes using those, there are alternatives. There's a middle point between like, the worst glyphosate out there that's what I mean is it's become this very, I'm a big fan of like keeping it real instead of, having to be so extreme and confusing, because then people walk away with those conversations without even understanding. They have an opinion and no understanding. So they're like, well, that's bad, but they don't even know why they're saying that.
For me, the key is, you have to keep an open mind and you have to look at what people are doing. And I'm always looking at what other growers are doing, what other farmers are doing, to see if there's a better way to do it. And I'm all ears for any better way to do, anything.
And that's a really great philosophy, because otherwise you've put yourself in a box and you've created some pretty boring boundaries for yourself, right? So
half the fun of being in the wine business, I think, is you constantly are learning. I mean, there are thousands of varietals to try and to taste, and there's always things to learn, and that's what keeps me invigorated by it. I mean, it's fun because of that.
Yeah. Awesome. Andy, do you have anything to add or any questions? Because I think we'll step into the tasting portion. If not,
No, let's taste. Let's drink some juice. I'm excited to see what Dave has to say about his wines.
Yeah, we've done the serious part. Let's do the fun part.
All right. I'm down. Yeah. So I asked Dave to pull out some of the wines that we had in market. So I think you're going to do some 2017 Wild East Chard, which I have available for our viewers.
Yes. So,
I don't have that with me. I have Emily's cab here, and so does Andy. So I'll let you have to run that whole show, friend.
I have both Viognier and Chardonnay here.
Oh yes, go for it.
Because we do have Viognier. I don't know if you have it in the market now, but
we're out, but we have more en route.
So this is the new vintage. It's 2018.
Yeah.
And we were doing a slight blend of Viogniers from Paso Robles and from the Central Valley for a couple of years. We were experimenting with a few vineyards to sort of figure out which ones we liked the best. And Stacy Vogel was going around and trying, and we'd buy a little bit and make them. But as of the 2018 vintage, we're 100% Paso Robles fruit now on this. So
okay.
Paso is about 4 hours south of us. This is in a slightly cooler part of Paso. The west side tends to be quite hot, and the closer you get to the coast, the cooler it is.
Okay.
For years, we had been doing Viognier from Madera, California, which is out in the Central Valley, which is pretty dry. So keeping the sugar levels down and getting good ripeness and keeping acidity in the wine in Madera was always a little bit more challenging. Paso now is quite a bit easier to get that style and the crispness and the freshness that we're looking for. So this is a really fun wine, the 18. It's super fresh and clean. It's got that kind of classic peach, white stone peach, stone fruit, apricot, a little bit of honeysuckle in a really crisp, clean package. I mean, as we know, Viognier can be a little bit syrupy and cloying and like thick. And so our goal with these wines is always to balance that weight and viscosity with freshness. And you know, the 18 is a really beautiful example, I think.
Awesome.
So, that's one of my favorite qualities about Viognier is that it has that almost a greasiness to it, you know, and it has texture. It's such a gorgeous food wine. It's as important as any other, well, like any wine, any good wine anyway, like anything on the dish. It's a fantastic food wine. I love it, love it, love it. Yeah,
me too. I mean, I love it with, you know, Asian spices. I love it with any kind of seafood, shellfish, raw oysters with, you know, some habanero salsa or whatever. I mean, I like hot food. So for me, this is a great wine with all those types of food. And in the US, we have a lot of obviously seafood areas like New Orleans or Southern California or all over California, and even New York. I love the oysters from the Northeast. So it's a great wine for all of those kinds of food. And, you know, it's very different climate here than as compared to Condrieu, which I think is important. Condrieu is, you know, very hilly, very rocky. It's quite a bit colder in general than your typical California climate. So, which is why
it's funny because the Condrieu can have like a lot of that weight we were talking about too. Whereas, I mean, I do love Condrieu. I'd be crazy not to, but yours tends to have a lot or a bit more acidity. And I feel like that acidity is what makes it even more exciting food pairing, because I think acidity in food is what really keeps everything interesting. So Condrieu, always amazing. But sometimes if you're going like, sometimes it is a difficult food pairing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in general, I think Condrieux have very good acidity, but if you put them through malolactic fermentation and give them creamier texture and put them into oak, it also gives it a creamier texture. So because they have pretty good natural acidity in general, it can stand up to that treatment and make a nicely balanced wine that's a little bit richer and heavier in style.
So you're viewing Yeasy's mallow?
Sees no mallow.
No mallow, okay.
No wood.
Okay.
But the problem is, you know, you can get over 100-degree days in California very commonly. And so if you take especially a warmer vintage Viognier from California and you do ML and put it through some barrel treatment, you're in danger of making something that's overly cloying and lacks acidity and lacks balance and structure. So we've had years where we've done some Viognier. We used to do a wild fermented Viognier in barrel, but in a warmer year, it's almost undrinkable for me. It's just hideously out of balance. So rather than, you know, mess with that and have really inconsistent results, for me, it's just a cleaner, safer bet to keep it a clean and fresh style and not do the ML, not do wood. And it just makes it a very fun, drinkable wine every year. So
before we go to the next wine, who makes your favorite Viognier out of your Rhone crew?
Well, you know, interestingly, they all have their own unique styles. So, I mean, I think François Villard and Yves Couleron both make a little bit, you know, cleaner style. But Yves Gangloff's wines, to me, are probably the most profound of those wines. But his wines generally are a much bigger wine. They're pretty intense. But also his vineyards are super steep. They're right up there behind his little house. And I mean, just walking those vineyards is quite an effort. I don't even know how he picks that stuff and brings it down.
Yeah, we visited his new property where he was just planting, and that was like actually scary.
It's intense. And you know, I mean, I love the way that they plant and I love the way they do things because it's kind of haphazard and old school and crazy. But, you know, and if people are falling down in a section, they just build a retainer wall out of stone and kind of back it up so that you can like walk without killing yourself. But
yeah, they're very manly. I'm a bit more sensitive.
It's like, can I have a lifeline, please?
Yeah, agreed. Okay, next, shall we go into the Chard, or did you have another white? No, I think.
No. So we make a number of different Chardonnays. We do a Napa Valley Chardonnay, which is partially stainless fermented, only partial malolactic. It's kind of a clean, fresh style. But this particular wine is my favorite Chardonnay that we do. We also make a few single vineyard Chards. My favorite of which comes from Hyde Vineyard down in Carneros. And those are all naturally fermented like this is, but the wild yeast is a really fun wine because it's a blend of 5 different vineyards. And we take a small portion of each vineyard when it comes in and we let the fermentations go naturally. It's barrel fermented. It's about 50% new French oak every year. And then we age it in oak for 16 months versus the Napa, which only is about 11 months. So the extra time in oak, actually, you would think you would get more of the new oak character on this wine. But I actually get less because I think it blows off with the extra time a little bit, the effect of the newer oak.
And you said that was newer French, Dave?
It's all French, yeah.
Right, okay.
And French, but 50% new on this one each year. So you get different nuances from each of the 5 vineyards, which adds to the complexity. And then also because the native yeasts are fermenting, you have 8 or 9 or 10 strains of yeast that turn the sugar into alcohol. And each strain will have its own aromatic nuance and flavor nuance. So you get a wine that really has a very complex flavor profile that has layers and keeps sort of, I always think of it as like someone telling me a story, and it keeps telling you a new part of the story as it opens up in the glass, as it lingers on your palate. You know, it truly is kind of a red wine lover's white wine because it has so much going on. And even though it's a much bigger, richer wine, it also has a great balance to it. So for me, it's I like a wine that makes you think as much as it gives you pleasure. You know, and some wines you drink them and you go, oh, that's delicious, it's great, and boom, you're fine. But this wine, every time I go back to it, makes me think more and makes me go, ooh, what is that? What's going on there? And that to me makes me happy.
I'm curious, Dave. Now, when you're doing wild ferment, is that dangerous at all? And I don't mean in a healthful, like to our health or anything like that.
Okay.
But I mean, for a winemaker to lose your product, do you ever have one of those plots that you've fermented them all separately and then you went, holy shit, what went wrong here? Like, you know, like what?
Yeah, it is definitely riskier, but the risks are not so significant that you're going to lose things. Like we've had situations where fermentations stick, and you know, for whatever reason, you know, the next yeast that should kick in isn't kicking in.
Right.
And so we have ways of trying to encourage it. You can
help it along.
You can stir it and get the dead yeast cells on the bottom, you know, which are the lees, moving in the barrel again, and sometimes that'll kick it in. Sometimes you can top from a different barrel, you know, top the barrel off, and just the little bugs in there will get the yeast moving. Or we've also moved barrels out into the sunshine for an hour or two, and just the warming it up out of the cave, a few degrees will also get them going.
But how about playing the guitar, Davey, for your yeast, your inactive yeast?
I haven't found playing the guitar for the barrels to encourage yeast movement, but I'm willing to try.
When you said top, like top it up with the other, I thought you said talk, and I was like, well, you're gonna coax it. Like, all right, come on, let's go, let's get her moving.
Sing to them or play the guitar or whatever it takes, but generally speaking, yeah, topping the barrel, just
right,
you know, adding a little bit of juice from a different barrel that's moving better.
Get some different yeast in there.
Obviously, we'll encourage that. But in the worst case scenario, if you can't get it to go, we'll inoculate that barrel and put it into the other blend. So it'll go into the Napa mix as an inoculated wine. So there'll be some wild fermentation in there, but we'll inoculate with the commercially bred yeast, which is probably very similar to what the yeast that finishes the other wines is, because different yeasts, it's interesting because yeasts, you know, basically turn sugar into alcohol, but a lot of strains of yeast, as the alcohol rises, die. So they're not quite as smart or as resilient. And the commercial yeast that we use for other fermentations is usually quite similar to the ones that perform best at higher alcohol levels when you're doing native yeast fermentation. So they'll take those yeast strains and freeze them and preserve them and populate them and then sell them as a commercially bred yeast because they react better under higher alcohol scenarios. So, I mean, we're not talking about super high alcohol. We're talking 13 to 14% alcohol.
Yeast is a very fascinating product, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's garage chemistry, and it's really kind of fun. And, you know, all the Pinots we do are also native fermented, and we ferment those in picking bins. So we punch the skins down by hand. It's kind of dirty and fun, and you know, it's a little more garage style winemaking, but it's very hands-on, and I think it makes for a much more delicate, much more balanced approach.
It's so hands-on that some of the yeast is from people's hands.
Could
That's
be, although
that's how hands-on it is.
we wear these big gloves that go all the way up to here that I think are generally used, you know, for hungry and birthing cows and crap
taking care of the inside of a horse.
Yeah, exactly. So we wear those when we do this.
Those will be the new gloves now that we all have to wear gloves and masks everywhere we go. So we'll get you to send us some of those long ones.
All the way up to here, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll stop talking about yeast because you guys took it too far, but that's good. You're doing a really good job describing the wines, Dave. I'd say thus far you really like making me. I know what it tastes like, and I'm like jealous. I'm like, huh? Why can't I have some wild yeast chard?
I'm quite jealous.
I know.
What are you getting in that chard right there, Dave? Explain it to me, please.
Okay, what you want? Flavor profile?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has a really lovely hazelnutty aroma right off the bat, and which I adore. It's like a toasted hazelnut almost, and then it has a sort of lemony curd quality to it. So it has a really nice citrusy nose that goes with that like toasty nutty character really well. And then on the palate, it has a wonderful richness to it. So our goal in making this wine has always been sort of Montrachet. You know, that wine to me, every time I've barrel tasted that wine in Burgundy from different producers, it has this exotic character to it and a creaminess and an acidity at the same time that is really, it's a little bit of a mystery how that happens, I think. And I think the native yeast has a lot to do with it, but also just, you know, cooler vineyard sites and sort of minerally soils and all of those things contribute to that. But this wine has a richness, but it's a balanced richness. So it's not that kind of cloying vanilla and oaky California buttery Chardonnay thing.
Yeah.
It's much more complex than that. It's got baking spices in it. It's got hints of cedar. It's just got a really lovely mix of savory and sweet notes.
And did we talk about the wood, or were we just talking about the wood when it was Viognier? Is this half French and half?
Yeah, it was half.
100% French oak.
100% French, half new, half
new, half 2 or 3 vintage old.
Right.
So after about 3 vintages, we tend to move the barrels out because just keeping the bacteria from taking over in a barrel can be more difficult after a few years without like sulfuring the crap out of the barrel and overdoing that. But
yeah, and this is the one that he ages a bit longer too. I think he said it was like 16, 17 months.
15 months in oak. So yeah, the Napa Chard comes out usually in about 11 months and gets bottled, and it's a sort of a fresher, more daily drinking style of Chardonnay for me, and it's beautiful and it goes well with food. But you know, this wine has just so much like spice and elegance and layers going on in it, and aromatically too. I mean, just I pulled this one just out of a box instead of out of the cooler because I wanted it to be kind of room temperature, because it really explodes out of the glass aromatically that way. I mean,
and like you said, it's a red lover's white, you know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of good Chardonnay, if you get it too cold, you kind of mask the nuance and the flavor.
It's all muted
until it comes up to temperature.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is a kind of wine, you know, in a lovely glass that 20 minutes after you pour it smells and tastes even differently than right after you open the bottle. So oxygen, especially for young white wines, I think is a good thing. Really kind of helps it develop.
Delicious.
I wish you guys were, smelling and.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I'm very upset that we're separated by this Zoom. I'm having feelings of sadness.
Well, I'm looking forward to sitting down and enjoying wine with you again in the near future.
Very soon.
Hug each other and try wine.
Yeah, this is. I mean, we're adapting, but this ain't the same. Yeah. All right, we'll spare the audience our sob story. Next, I guess we can head into. I see that you have a bottle of Oracle, but we have the Emily's, the 2017, right, Angie? No, 16.
16, yeah.
Okay, so I poured myself a glass before I brought you the bottle. We're in like lockdown mode here, so it's impossible to get samples. So I did have a 16 kicking around, but that's all I could get us. So I'll let Andy actually do his something. And why don't you describe it to us, and then I'll let Dave give you the old specifics after your descriptor.
It's fantastic.
No.
Say that again.
Dave?
No, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. Andy's gonna do it.
No, it's nice because it does have your, your blackberry, your like the dark blueberry, but I'm catching like a redness too in this wine. Not strawberry, but like black cherry almost in a way. Like there's a dark cherry-ness to it. It's a gorgeous smelling cab. And there's a smoky note, there's leather, there's
some black fruit too. Some black fruit and some.
Absolutely, yeah. That's where I started with the blackberry.
Roasted. Sorry.
I'm wondering the alcohol on here, because is it 14, 15?
14 something.
Yeah, 14.5 probably, something like
really
that.
Tiny on the right hand side of the front label, and it's side.
Oh, there she is. Am I getting old or what, man?
I can't.
Yeah, 14.2, 14.2, something I think. 14.2 or 14, something like that. It's lovely. That's a beautiful balance, and it has changed since Ali dropped it off.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the data sheet so I can tell you the exact blend, but there's probably some.
I got it. It's a 95% Cab. We've got 1% Cab Franc, and the rest is Merlot, 4% Merlot.
And I think if you want me, I can tell you a little bit about where this comes from. And
Please do.
Please, yeah.
So, this is a blend of hillside vineyard stuff that we do from like Stagecoach Vineyard or Oakville, but then also some valley floor fruit, which tends to be, maybe a little bit softer, a little bit more approachable, from right in front of the winery here in like Rutherford and Oakville, and a little bit from the west side of the valley too. So it gives it a nice complexity, without being sort of the really powerful mountain fruit 100%, which most of the other cabs we do are 100% mountain fruit. So the goal being, trying to make a wine that's a little bit more approachable as a young wine. And the addition of Merlot will round the edges off just a little bit and add a little bit of that red fruit as well. So this is a wine that we started making, I think, in 2014. And it's named Emily after my wife, Emily, who I lost to lung cancer. So we typically donate proceeds from our retail sales on this wine to the V Foundation for Cancer Research every year. So the wine is actually taken off in popularity because it's a little bit lower price point than our typical Oakville cab or Stagecoach cab, which is a good news, bad news thing. So it's become quite popular, but it's a beautiful wine, and I think it will age very nicely, but it's a little bit more approachable than the pure mountain fruit wines. But cab to me always is problematic as a young wine because it requires a little bit of time to kind of settle down.
think
Yeah,
about
the
itself.
Merlot does come out a bit more gentle, and I can see what you mean. Like it's not as tart, you know, it's got a lot of like, the tannin is quite soft and subtle, and I don't really get too much of that pulling that I would usually get with a young
Yeah, it'd be
cab.
aggressive.
Back to your peaks there, or
Yeah, where you're like you just
Is
know it's still, it's just not showing itself. It's almost being shy, but you get that like really, you get that tartness here that's kind of imbalanced.
honestly, this wine has become so popular that we've really started, you know, picking up small plots of more cabs so we can, you know, bring the production level up a little bit on this wine. And we've started releasing it a little earlier than I normally would release cab, just because the demand is there, and because, you know, the portions of the money go to the charity. So
Yeah, you want to keep that rolling.
get it out, the faster we can give the charity some money. And
and a lot of people always, you know, will bring in the story, and it is you know, and as unfortunate of a story this one is, it's heartfelt, and money's going to a charity, so I can understand why you would need
It's
to.
a beautiful legacy, that's for sure.
yeah, and, you know, I mean, the V Foundation is named after Jimmy Valvano, who was a basketball coach in the U.S., and a lot of his ESPN buddies and coaching buddies, like Coach Krzyzewski from, I think, Duke is
Duke.
where he has really jumped on the bandwagon here. And so they bring in a lot of celebrities, and they do a big wine event here in Napa every year. They do events all over the country, and they raise, you know, literally millions of dollars every year for specific research projects, and the money goes to the research project. So when my wife was still alive and she was fighting cancer, she was an honoree one year. And so, you know, she was a delightful woman from Minnesota, and everybody loved her, and, you know, Coach K loved her, and like everybody just like rallied behind her. So it became a very special charity for me. And I have a hard time going to the event because it just chokes me up all the time, but they raise a lot of money, and the money is very effectively used. And that resonates with me. I mean, some charities, you never know where the money ends up going. And these guys really focus on very specific research projects, and it makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, we love it. We love you, and we love honoring Emily, and it's very delicious, really.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it. And it's, for a Napa Valley Cabernet, I think it's very aggressively priced. Which is why it's become very popular, partially, but it's also just yummy. So
it is just yummy as well.
Unfortunately, the translation from what I think of as the price point here is a little bit different in Canada, but
it is. We have, this guy is available, I think it's about 110 Canadian a bottle. I'll when I send it out, I always tell people what the price is, but for the,
what is it out the cellar door, Dave?
Well, it doesn't translate, Andy, because it's like,
I almost hate to say it, but it's like a little under $60.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, given exchange and trial and the transportation, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's 109.75 here, and that actually is a pretty good, because with the exchange, and then, you know, obviously we have to add an Onivino commission, and then the SAQ adds a small commission to that too. That it really all checks out.
No, that's fair.
Yeah, if you just directly like did the conversion at the time this wine was ordered, I think the dollar now is probably a different landscape today than it was a few months ago.
Yeah.
Good old COVID, but yeah, it's not that much more when you really break it down. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to ask some questions about that, but Dave, why don't you tell us about the Oculus?
The Oracle.
Pardon me, Oracle. Oculus is Mission Hill, I think, in BC.
Oculus is just a cool word.
Yeah, they don't know. Their big wine is Oculus, not Oracle.
That's a good one. Yeah, so the Oracle is our flagship Bordeaux blend. So having like sort of cut my teeth on like Bordeaux varietals when I was younger, the blends of Bordeaux have always intrigued me, because I mean, in California, traditionally, we do mostly varietal specific sorts of things and much less of a blend style. So anything 75% or above can be labeled by the grape variety, Merlot, Cab, whatever. But I really wanted to do a wine that was more about blending and making something that was really unique and spectacular year in and year out. So we started producing this wine in 2001. And at that point, it was just a blend of Cab, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. And the first,
obviously in that order.
Well, the first vintage was like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Oh, wow.
I was really kind of going for an older world style. But, in the States, Cabernet is king, and a wine that isn't predominantly Cabernet is significantly less popular here commercially. So the second vintage ended up being more Cabernet based, and we've kind of stuck with that most of the time going forward. So we've had a couple of vintages where I think 11 was a very cold year, and most of the Cabernet just didn't ripen well. So it was quite green. And the 11 Oracle ended up being predominantly Merlot. And I am a huge fan of Merlot. I love Merlot. Bordeaux is predominantly Merlot based. But for whatever reason in the States, Merlot has taken a punch in the gut over the years.
Sideways, did it?
That certainly didn't help. Although it got all the Merlot producers to rip it out and put Pinot in. So the people that still make Merlot now, I think, are making very good quality Merlot, and it's very reflective of the varietal and, stylistically appropriate. But this wine, the blend changes every year. So we start from scratch every year, take the individual components and start mixing and matching. And it can take 15 or 18 different blending sessions to come up with the blend, but that to me is super fun. A lot of the wines that we do, like Pinots, are you pick, 6 tons of Pinot from Gary's vineyard and you get what you get. And there's really not any blending to do. You just, you care for it and bottle it, and that's what it is. But this has all 5 Bordeaux varietals. So Cabernet, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. And the blend changes a little bit every year. So we put the blend right on the back of the bottle every year so that you know exactly what's in it. And so that when I'm sitting here talking to you, I can read it and look really smart, like I remember every vintage blend.
Such a smart guy.
So the 15, which is our 20th anniversary wine, it's got the nice little sticker on it. It's 20th anniversary. So 55 Cab, 26 Merlot, 13 Cab Franc, 3 Malbec, and 3 Petit Verdot. And this is a slightly unusual because typically Cab Franc, because I'm a huge Cabernet Franc fan, comes in as the second largest percentage in this blend, but every year is different. So we go with, we do blind tastings amongst 5 of us, and we compare notes and we come up with what makes the best wine every year. And so that's what the 15 is. And, compared to the straight Cabernets, which also usually, by the way, have Cab Franc in them and maybe a little Merlot. This wine has, to me, a little rounder character because of the blend, and is a little bit less tannic as a young wine. It's still got a little bit softer edges, but it's still a pretty big wine. And, it has a lot of the coffee, cedar, black fruit, pretty intense, and a reasonable amount of tannin to go along with that. But you also get a little bit of the blueberry, kind of cocoa powder from the Cab Franc, a little dustiness from the Merlot. So it has a complexity that, a straight Cab for me usually doesn't have as a young wine. I mean, for me, Cabernet, significantly more Cabernet based wines take quite a bit longer for me to start to get that complexity and little hint of earthiness. This wine, I think, comes out with a little more of that classic Bordeaux essence to it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Again, very good descriptor. You don't even need to like bring samples of wine anymore. We've just got Dave the descriptor.
Well, you know, I mean,
you're not new at this.
No, Dave's on the case.
Yeah, Dave's not new. I also wanted to talk about the logo, which is like that sun wing god, right?
So it's, I stole the logo from ancient Assyrian sculptures and artifacts, and it's the sun god, the Assyrian sun god Shamash. So the Assyrians were some of the very first people to discover fermentation, along with, you know, people in Georgia, people in Croatia, but, you know, several thousand years BC, the Assyrians were making beer and making wine. And my father's family was Assyrian. So my grandparents came from northwestern Iran and sort of escaped in the early 1900s from all the violence and stuff that was going on there, and came to the US. But my grandfather had a vineyard there, made his own wine. They raised their own vegetables, lambs, you know, animals. I mean, they lived off the land. So when my grandfather got to the States and was living in Chicago, and he was actually a cook in a local hotel during the Depression, so he had a good job. And but he bought grapes with a bunch of his Italian neighbors in Cicero, Illinois, off the train, and they'd split them up and they'd go in the basement and make wine. So, you know, as a kid, there was always a barrel of something going off in my grandfather's basement. And my uncle sort of bought a vineyard here in Napa when he got older, because he didn't want the tradition to die. He didn't want it to skip a generation. So in honor of sort of my grandfather and my uncle and my father's heritage, we use the Assyrian sun god Shamash as our label. And it's just to honor the, you know, the sun and how we wouldn't be here without it. Wouldn't grow
we wouldn't have anything without the sun. You're right.
So
years ago, Ali and I used to live together, and the gentleman downstairs made his own wine in the house, and you could always tell where the Greeks and Italians lived in town, because there would be the empty boxes out in front on garbage day. There would be the stack of wooden wine grape boxes, right?
He was so sweet, and he'd bring us the wine.
Oh, they talk like this. Alexander, he's John. He's John.
He was always so happy, because he knew what I was an importer, and he was always so happy to bring me his wine, and he always tasted like banana. Polished banana. Yeah, it was the worst, but I loved it, and I always honored it anyway, because I was like, you know what? You're not going to get more love in a bottle than what this man is going to bring me. And he'd always have these like odd receptacles. He'd put it in like the weirdest, like it's like half a jar, and then it was like, it's so strange. God bless Angelo, though. I
love those guys too, though, that, you know, that are making wine that aren't using modern technology at all. And they're not like, there are still these guys in France today that, you know, they never look through a refractometer and check the sugar of their grapes. They never do chemical analysis in the barrel. They pick the grapes when they go out and taste them, and they taste good. Yeah. And then they ferment them, and they put them in a tank, or put them in a barrel, and they let them rest, and they taste the wine. And then when it tastes like it's ready, they bottle it and they sell it. And there's still guys that do that. And they're like, if you ask them, what's the pH, what's the total acidity when you bottle, they don't know. And they don't care. They just like do it from their gut and their heart.
We did find a way to overcomplicate it a little bit, didn't we?
I mean, well, I know guys that are so like technical and mathematical that everything has to be, you know, by the numbers. And, you know, I like tasting grapes and knowing in my gut that they're ready to pick, you know, and looking at them, and the seeds are crunchy and brown, and like they go from being like purple to being like black in like one day. And it's like, these things are, it's go time. That to me is fun.
It is fun. And when you say go, it's like, it's really go. It's like, go fast.
Tomorrow at like 4 a.m., please.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, please, you're well-mannered. Amazing. Well, thank you for all that. That's just like spectacular. Do you want to do a quick rundown of the drink now, or the drink when rather? Like Wild Yeast Chard, when would that be for my client? When do you think he should?
You know, I mean, the 17, I think, is just raring to go.
Okay.
I think that though, you know, a lot of this is personal taste. I find, you know, like people like their wines a little differently, but I will say that the Wild Yeast Chardonnay is a white wine from California that will age very well.
Okay.
I've had this wine out of larger format bottles, 15 years old, that were spectacularly good. I mean, like lemony, fresh, beautiful. And typically that's not the general consensus on California Chardonnay. But from good vineyard sources and wines that have good acid and balance, I think that there are certain producers that make really ageable white wines. But
yeah,
this wine is so beautiful right now, though. If it's in my cellar, I have a hard time keeping my hands off of it. So it's drinking beautifully now. If you like a white wine that has a little bit of earthy funk to it, it'll be good in 10 years. But it's stunningly beautiful right now, and goes well with food. I mean, and it's got the power to go with, you know, pork or, you know, different types of meat as well as fish. So.
Okay. And what about Emily's? I mean, that from tasting just now too, I would say that it could definitely age a bit longer. But I find that the consumer palate really seems to like, even though they should go longer, it's like they want them younger for some reason. So.
And I think that's very common. I mean, people tend to drink wines way earlier than I necessarily would, but but people like the fruit. They like the power, and you know, I have a bunch of friends who are hockey players, and all they want is big cab and steak.
Yeah.
And I say go for it. You know,
That's
drink
my
it
brother.
when you like it. You know, I mean, drink it then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but for those, like, I'm a bit like you. I like when things get into the secondary and tertiary aroma and taste profile zone. So like, I would say my guess would be like, this is the 16 Emily's, maybe like 2023, 2025 zone.
I think it'll be absolutely stunning at that age. I mean, with Miner wines, we go back to 1996, and I have not opened a cab or a Merlot that we've made since then that isn't still in really beautiful shape. So they'll age pretty long, but if you like the bigger fruit and the more power, then in the next 5 to 10 years, I say it's ideal.
Okay, and then for further, you would wait till like past like 2030 even, when COVID's over.
I don't think that wine will go bad unless, you know, occasionally you get a bottle that, you know, either leaked or has some issue or whatever.
Yeah.
And that happens. But in general, I'd say it's not going to go bad by then. It'll just be much earthier and much softer, and, you know, a little bit more like what you think of when you think of an older Bordeaux.
Okay.
So.
And then for Oracle, we're going to order the 15 once we're allowed to order again. Things are on shutdown here for private importation, but that would be even longer, no?
Yeah, I mean, and with Oracle, we've always held it for a couple of years before releasing it.
Yeah.
Just so that when we do release it, it's a little more approachable and ready to drink. And because it's more of a blend, it's a little more approachable than like the cabs would be, the Oakville or the Stagecoach cab. But we have always, since the first vintage, held it back and released it, you know, like they would for a reserve Italian wine or something. You have to barrel age it so long and you have to bottle age it so long, and then it comes out. And so we've always done that with the Oracle, just so that it was, more approachable right when we release it. But yeah, it's a wine that'll hold on a long time. The 01, which is the first vintage, is really, really beautiful right now, but it's definitely more old world. It's got a lot of that earthiness, a lot of the leathery characteristics. And because it's a, like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 blend, you don't get as much of the powerful Cabernet character.
Yeah.
It's got a really classic old world style right now, but that's 19 years old. So.
Okay. All right. Amazing. And then I guess to close things off, how are things like over there as far as how you guys are experiencing our friend, the virus?
I want to know who's cutting your hair, Dave. Who's cutting your hair?
Yeah, you look pretty good.
Look at this. Look at these sideburns, man. Look at this. Come on. This is crazy.
First month or so, I was hiding in Montana in Montana. So,
Do you have property? Do you have a home up there?
I have a home up there on the Bitterroot River. So I was fishing and socially distancing in a really beautiful setting. But
that's amazing.
I have 2 teenage daughters, so they wanted to come home and sleep in their own beds and whatever. But so we came back home to Napa, and the girl who cuts my hair took one look at me and went, "Oh my God." So she came over with her mask on, and she colored my 18-year-old daughter's hair, and she cut my hair, and she trimmed my 15-year-old's hair. And we all wore masks, and she wore a mask, and we were very careful and did it outside.
I had to color my own hair this morning.
Yeah. I feel like
it's pretty good.
Like so much better after getting my hair cut. I don't, in the 70s I had really long hair, but now I can't bear it after 4 weeks. I gotta get it cut. So
I loved in the U.S. news how everybody was outside having the protests of the and one of the signs said, "I need a haircut." Like, you weren't that much of a prepper. Eh? Did you forget to put clippers in the bunker?
Yeah.
I need a haircut.
I ordered a set of clippers when I got to Montana, and they finally got there. It took a long time, but then I was afraid to do it because I figured I'm going to hack the crap out of myself here. It's like, I've never buzzed my own head, but I would have ended up,
my girlfriend just mentioned yesterday that she would do mine, so we'll see.
Well, I would trust her more than I would trust, doing it myself, because I can't really see, it's like, what am I doing back there? I don't know.
Okay, but how's it going on the business front? Is it?
Well, it's a challenge for everyone. The vast majority of our wholesale customers are restaurants, and obviously some of them here are open for curbside service or whatever, and they've loosened the laws in a lot of the U.S. to let restaurants sell wine retail. So I know in like New York and stuff like that, they're selling bottles with to-go food, and
it's happening here too. Yeah.
So that's been great, and it's very unusual, I think, for the American regulation industry to loosen their regulations, and it's kind of shocking they did it, but they did it. So that's been good. And the retail side of business around the country has been, reasonably good, I think, for our distributors and partners and stuff like that. It's been okay, but the vast majority of my customers are restaurants, and so I'm not really selling. That business has gone to almost nothing. And we have a open tour and tasting room here at Miner, which is closed. So that's been closed since I think the end of March. So that's usually a pretty big source of revenue for us. The good news is that we've been doing a lot of online sales, and online sales before was probably 5 or 6% of what our retail sales were, and now it's 100, but the dollar numbers have been reasonably good. So that's allowed me to keep paying at least a few of my people on a regular basis. And and keep
and then
them.
moving forward, that'll probably be like a good, it'll remain an important part of the numbers, because I think a lot of people, like for us, that's basically what's happening, is like everything as well as stopped here, but we're selling so much more to the private consumer than we did before. And then I think, so it's like definitely a huge lull, but then we get to keep that was cultivated, right, as a result of it. So maybe it'll be like this, I don't know. I'm hoping everybody's business gets to recover, you know, as much as possible, but I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we.
I think it will continue to be a pretty significant portion of what we do, because even though Napa is a huge tourist destination, I mean, Napa Valley, I think, gets more tourists per year typically than Disneyland, which is hard to believe, but it's true. And I don't, you know, those crowds are not going to come flying back immediately. And, you know, it's going to be a different world. And, you know, the wine industry in general, especially on the production side, is a very capital intensive business. So, you know, my operating capital exists because of sales. And without that income, it's really a difficult business to survive in. So every bottle that we can sell, you know, right now over the internet, or people calling and even coming by and picking it up curbside locally, is significant to me.
I think the biggest buzzword that I've heard out of this whole thing recently is what, you know, your pivot. What's your pivot? How are you adapting? Or how are we all going to adapt to this? Because I know personally, as a comedian, you know, it's done for now. There's no gatherings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also in the guitar manufacturing business.
I see those. I didn't know if those were like really funky Ovation guitars, because it's a hollow body, right?
It's a hollow body archtop jazz guitar. So these three are all acoustic. There's no electronics in them, but these are made by a company called Benedetto Guitars, and they're the premier jazz guitars made in the world.
Oh, wow. They're beautiful.
These guitars,
but you know what I mean about the Ovation ones? They'll always have the small holes along the top and the side, or, you know.
And these are not the typical sound holes. These three guitars were made by Bob Benedetto for a collector who then sold them to me. But this is a much more elaborate sound hole design. But these three guitars are called Tre Fratelli, the three brothers, and they all have different tone woods in the back and sides. One of them is rosewood, one of them is bubinga, and one of them is a Mexican tone wood called Palo Escrito. They're all hand-carved instruments. From the tops are European spruce, and they're made like a violin or a cello would be. They're all hand-carved out of solid pieces of wood. And
so what, maybe like 3 inches deep? They don't look like they're uberly deep.
These are all 3 inches deep.
Right.
They have arched back and top, and solid wood sides that are, you know, bent. And so we make about 100 guitars a year. Some of them are a laminated guitar with pickups in them that professional jazz musicians would use all over. But a large number of friends of mine are working jazz musicians, and they're all out of work too. And jazz musicians, much like comedians, probably don't make a hell of a lot of money per gig. So these guys are all struggling badly right now too, because, you know, they're not playing gigs. They're doing streaming online gigs on, you know, Facebook or Zoom or whatever they can do. And
yeah. And there's not a whole lot of money. I've made, you know, a little bit selling albums online, and but the government has kicked in, like you guys in the States, the $1,200 or whatever it is in Canada. But I mean, after that runs out in a couple months, then what? So we'll see. Gotta see what the pivot is. I'll start delivering groceries.
Yeah, that's
lucrative business now.
I mean, in everything in life, I think, you know, being able to adapt is key to survival. And, you know, I mean, stuff burns down and you build it back up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we're all very creative people. I think we got this. I think you got this, Andy.
Yeah, I got this.
You got this. Maybe not tomorrow, but you know, you'll get it eventually.
Yeah, it'll come
Dave's
back.
got it. Dave's got it bad.
We'll do a streaming comedy jazz wine night.
Well, let's definitely do it. I'm down.
Well, you know what, Dave? I'm gonna organize with our clients. I'm gonna sell your charm and see if we can get our private clients to take a case of the Cab and the Chard, and we'll do like a virtual tasting if you're down for that.
That'd be awesome.
It's fun. I've been doing a few, and they're enjoyable.
Well, I've never not had a fun time hanging out with you and your customers in Montreal. So
awesome. You're very cool to say that. All right, well, we're gonna wrap it up because we've been going for 90 minutes, friends.
Wow, that flew by.
It did.
Thanks for the information, Dave. Thank you very much.
thank you guys. Really a pleasure to hang out with you.
Yeah, I miss you so much. It's really nice to see you. I'll give you a call later, but really good talk. I think we gave some good content, and like I said, you're very good at the descriptors, and I mean that's part of what we have to do to adapt. We have to like have people really experience what we're drinking without being with them, and I think that you've adapted to that quite well. So I appreciate that big time.
It's fun to do. So
Yeah.
Sharing is caring.
That's what they say. All right. Bye, gents. I'll speak to you both after. Thanks again.